So yes, as I said, we're continuing on from last week's talk on Project Rebuild. If you remember, I was saying last week again, it's been a very devastating year for us. Many of us, around 150,000 people have died to this pandemic. There's those of us here who have lost family and friends to COVID-19. Over 3 million people now have died to the virus worldwide. There are also those among us who have personally suffered. You've come down with the virus yourself, or you've known friends and loved ones who have come down with the virus. They suffered. They've had to go into hospital, and by the grace of God, they've recovered and come home again, and that's awesome as well. But there are those who have lost their jobs. So, businesses have completely collapsed. Just look at how it's affected the education system and the schools, our kids' learning programs. And it's just been completely disrupted, and how they personally have been impacted in their relationships. Our kids, they long for and they need connection with others, with other friends and peers and so on. They haven't had that for a big period of this year, and it's been horrible. There has just been so much. There is so much for us to rebuild in our lives, and that's just considering the impact of the pandemic alone. And there are, of course, all the other things, all the other areas of our lives that need to be rebuilt. There's rubble, if you like, and brokenness that we bring on ourselves as a result of our disobedience to God, our sin, then, to use an old-fashioned word. Or there's the rubble and the brokenness that has come about by the sinful actions of others and the things that they have done to us. It just seems that going through life itself, it seems to cause parts of our lives to crumble and collapse. And so there is just so much to rebuild. And, often it kind of feels, where exactly do we start with this? And well, that's what kind of these talks have been about. We've started to look at the Nehemiah story, the book of Nehemiah. It's very much a book about rebuilding. It's a book about strategy and vision. And there is, I think, much we can learn from Nehemiah's story about rebuilding our lives from a spiritual and practical perspective, and the life of the church as well. So, last week we were looking at Nehemiah and how he responded when he was first presented with all the devastating news about the current state of Jerusalem. The city, if you remember, had completely been destroyed. It had been ransacked. The protective walls around the city had been pulled down. The city gates had been burned down. And it was just in a real bad state. And we read about how he responded to that, how he fell down on his face and he wept, didn't he? And he was fasting and he prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed before God. And you know what? He was in that place. He was in that posture for somewhere around 4 to 5 months, praying and fasting before God. And that was before then he plucked up the courage to go and tell the Persian king who he worked for that, actually, I'm going to leave now. He wanted to go and pursue the things that God had put on his heart to do, and that was to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. So in today's text in chapter 2 that James kindly read out, we read how Nehemiah is starting to put together a plan to rebuild. And this is the thing. Sometimes when we think about planning, we think about it as not being a spiritual thing, right? We kind of hold up prayer next to planning, and we kind of say, prayer's the spiritual thing, but planning, that's the kind of practical, that's not the spiritual thing. But do you know what? That couldn't be further from the truth. There are so many people, godly people in the scriptures we see after story, people making plan after plan after plan after plan. I mean, you just take Moses, for example. He plans to organize the people and how they're going to live and dwell together when they're wandering through the wilderness together. Remember that? We see David. He makes plans for building the temple of God, where God is going to come and dwell with his people. We see Jesus, he makes plans on how he's going to enter into Jerusalem to fulfill his mission by dying a horrible death on the cross for all of us. We see Paul, he makes plans on how he's going to plant brand new church communities throughout the Greco-Roman world. He's making plans after plans. So making plans isn't unspiritual. Actually, the only time that making plans is unspiritual is when it's not done, or when it's done not in his presence. When we have to understand that God so desires to be a part of our planning processes and all of our plans, so that maybe they will actually line up with his purposes in the world. So when we do that, when we do make plans and we include God in that, when we plan before him, it is just as spiritual as praying before God. And so with that in mind, you'll understand what I'm about to say now, where, often in life, when we kind of see the rubble or encounter the rubble and the wreckage of our lives, and it needs to be rebuilt, praying isn't always enough, right? Often we have to couple that prayer together with actually making a plan. So if you, for example, are sick to death of your job, you feel so neglected in your job, you're unfulfilled, it's kind of turned out to be nothing like the job that you actually joined all those years ago. Your boss has turned out to be a complete jerk. What do we do? Or when you've completely run your credit card up to the hilt, or your credit cards up to the hilt, and your finances are totally out of control, what do we do? Or when a relationship that you're in, your marriage just doesn't seem to be working the way it used to. There's just this growing disparity between you and your partner, or you and your spouse, and you just seem to be at loggerheads all the time. It's not like where I used to be. When all these things happen, what do? Well, first we pray. Absolutely. We pray. But then you have to start to get a plan together. And so today I just want to take some simple pointers from Nehemiah's story here. And we're going to highlight 3 absolute, common sense questions to ask ourselves in order to make good plans, when it comes to rebuilding the rubble of our lives, and when it comes to pressing forward throughout the rest of this year with all the changes that lay ahead of us. So the 3 questions then to form the basis of good plans are: where are you now? Where are you heading? Where are you going? And how are you going to actually get there? How are you going to get there? So first, where am I right now? So this stage is all about examining our present reality, examining and assessing our present reality. In verse 13, Nehemiah said it this way. He said, "By night I went out through the valley gate towards the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem." Nehemiah then was examining and assessing the walls. He's looking at the extent of the damage. What is it? What's the state of affairs here? What am I faced with? Now, if we're going to actually formulate a good plan for rebuilding the walls of our own lives, we have to ask that question. What is the current state of affairs? What is it I'm actually dealing with here right now? Now, there's a couple of kind of sub-points that are going to be made out of this initial stage, if you like, this stage of the planning process. Firstly, this can be the loneliest part of the process. This can be the loneliest part. When you're assessing the rubble, assessing the wreckage in our own lives, when we're identifying what's this present reality that I am at right now, it can be a lonely place. And we see that in Nehemiah's story in verse 12. He said, "I set out during the night." So it's nighttime. It's kind of a picture of loneliness. I set out during the night with a few others. There were no mounts with me except the one that I was on. And then further down in verse 16, it said the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to anyone. Nehemiah is examining the damaged walls alone. It can be a lonely place. And I bet there are those among us here who have had to face your own brokenness, be that, as I said before, the result of our own sin. Maybe it's an addiction to alcohol or pornography, or an addiction to gambling or whatever. Or it could be the brokenness as a result of the actions of others and what they've done to us. So brokenness caused through bullying or neglect or abuse. I'm sure you could testify to the fact that that initial stage of facing the reality of where you are right at that moment, that can be a really lonely place. So it can be a lonely place, but secondly, it can also be really tiring. You know, when you're examining your walls, it can be tiring. So going on in verse 13, Nehemiah says, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, and had been destroyed, which had been destroyed by fire. And then it goes on in verse 14, he moves to another gate, to the fountain gate, and then to the King's Pool. And he couldn't actually get through there, so he has to find another route, and he goes up through the valley, and he's continuing to examine the walls. It was just exhausting, and it can be exhausting for us who are examining and assessing the wreckage of our walls. You know, I remember when Ange was being kind of tenderly escorted through this process of rebuilding in her own life. You know, for more than 7 years of her childhood, she had grown up in such a turbulent and destructive family life, with an alcoholic for a father who just used to beat up on her mum pretty much every night. You know, having to step in to physically defend your mother from a physically abusive dad at the age of 13, 14 or 15, that tends to have or cause breakage in a young person's life. And so she was, now in her early 20s, and for a period of around about sort of 3 years, Andrew was going through this process of examining the wreckage and how do we rebuild, asking those sorts of questions. And I can remember in those early stages, nearly every time she'd come back from a session with a friend, she'd be like looking exhausted. And she'd say sometimes, this is just so exhausting. And she just often wanted to just leave the issues, leave the brokenness locked up, in a box somewhere. It was, it just seemed easier sometimes or less tiresome just to kind of sidestep the wreckage that she'd encountered in her life and just brush it aside, put it under the carpet. It was far easier to do that than to actually face it. It's kind of like that room that we have in our house. I know you have this room or this cupboard. And, it's where you hide all of the mess, all of the clutter, all the things that we don't want to actually deal with right now. So maybe you're at home, you receive a call or a text from a friend and they just say, hey, I'm in the area. I'm just going to pop in. Is that okay? You kind of go, yeah, okay. And then you kind of look around and think, our house is in a complete mess. I need to do something about this. And in about sort of 60 seconds flat, you're kind of grabbing all of the clutter and all the mess, and you just dump it in that room. Yeah, that room that I'm talking about, or in that cupboard. And then that room, you don't want to go in that room ever again, do you? It's just, what's the other side of the door. I don't want to even turn the handle and go in. I know what's there. And, that's kind of like, that's the way we kind of deal with mess sometimes in our life. And that's sometimes how we are when we're examining the walls and the broken walls in our lives. It's exhausting sometimes. And quite frankly, we'd rather just not go in that room. But the trouble is, we absolutely need to take courage to open up that door and go into that room and examine and assess the facts of the present reality if we're going to be able to move forward on our project rebuild in our life, if you like. Now, a key point to make in this, though, is this examining of the wreckage of our life. We can do so in two different ways. We can do it with God, or we can do it without God. I can tell you, doing it without God really is not a good idea. This, I guess, is called introspection. And introspection, or going there without God, is not fun at all. It becomes really disillusioning. It becomes depressing. You know, introspecting, it can often lead us into a place of just feeling, or having feelings of shame and unworthiness, and feelings of, man, I just can't do this. It feels impossible. I can't change. It's impossible. I can't see change happening. So it becomes so disillusioning. Yeah, when Jesus, he was asked the question one day, who can be saved? And looking at that Greek word for saved there, it's sozo. It's like they're saying, who can be sozoed? Or to expand what that word means, who can be rescued, healed, and restored? Or to use the language from that we're using in a Nehemiah story, who can have the wrecked walls of our lives rebuilt? And Jesus answers that in Matthew 19:26. It said, Jesus looked to them and said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. See, it's absolutely vital that we, and this is the kind of the next sub point in this, absolutely vital that we invite God to walk with us through this process of examining and assessing the reality of where we are in our brokenness. You see, God is, well, we were singing it earlier, God is strong. God is stronger than us. But you know what? Also, God is so much more gracious than what you are with yourself. He is way more kind. So when he walks us along the fallen walls, the wreckage of our own lives, his words are never condemning. He is always filled with hope, or gives us hope. He says, yes, we can do this. I can do this for you. You can change. I'll help you in that process. He is the God of restoration. That's what he does. It's his job. It's what he does in us. In verse 18 of our text, Nehemiah says, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me. And I think we can take that for ourselves. You can take that for yourself here this morning. This is why you can take courage to assess the reality of your life and the brokenness, because the gracious hand of God is on you. And when the gracious hand of God is on you, then all things are possible. Change does happen. It can happen. Healing does happen. Rebuilding, reforming does happen. So we have to examine the present reality. Where am I right now? And secondly, we have to say, well, where am I heading? Where do I actually want to be? The second half of verse 12, Nehemiah again, he says, I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. What this is all about is about getting vision from God, vision for your life from God. There was a pastor and theologian, I'm sure many of you have heard of, John Stott. He defined vision this way. He said, vision is a deep dissatisfaction with what is and a clear grasp of what could be. I just love that expression. It's a deep dissatisfaction with what is. Where I am right now, I am so dissatisfied with that. But it's also a clear grasp of what could be, what possibly could be with God's help and God's grace. So what was Nehemiah's vision? Well, quite simply and quite clearly, it was for the people of Israel to be back at home in Jerusalem, for the city to be completely restored, and for the people to be settled in their land and to be safe and protected. And his attitude was one of, well, why not? It's like, heck, with God's help, this could happen. Why not? If God wants this to happen, if God wants to bring about change, if he wants to rebuild, then absolutely it will happen. See, when you have vision, when there is vision, lives get changed. When you have vision, communities get changed. Nations get changed. The world is changed. I just wonder if there are those of us here this morning listening, or people listening to the recording after, if you're here and you have a vision to see not only your own life rebuilt and changed, but also the lives of others within the larger community around us changed and rebuilt as well. How many of us know that parenting is hard work? Yeah, we know parenting is hard work. But imagine somebody here this morning having a vision to see young families from within the community just better equipped in the whole area of parenting. Just better equipped in techniques and healthy discipline and so on. Just training new parents to raise families more effectively. And so much so that they say, do you know what? I'm going to actually invest in a local parenting support group, or I'm going to create a local parenting support group where I'm going to be able to pass on to some others some of my own experiences, my invaluable experiences and knowledge on parenting. Or imagine someone here having a vision to help people conquer their debt issues. It's a real big issue for people today. Just a vision to see people breaking free from debt. And they have such a heart for families, and they're fired up with that vision that, I'm just going to get involved again in that CAP money budgeting course that we haven't been able to run for a while. And, I'm just going to help get that fired up again. I want to get trained and want to help people do that. Or imagine someone here saying to themselves, I'm just so fed up of seeing the cycles of brokenness and dysfunction that runs right through families, sort of generation after generation after generation. Imagine them having a vision to see young adults who have been on the receiving end of all of that, being badly injured in some way and broken, abused in those sorts of families, but seeing these people breaking that cycle, getting healed, getting restored, creating good, healthy, long-lasting, life-giving relationships, life-giving marriages. You see, lives get changed when people get vision. When you and I say, like Nehemiah, why not? Why not with God's help? If this is what God actually wants, then why not? Then people's lives get changed. We need to have vision. We need to know, what is it on your heart, God, for my life and the life of those around me? So where am I right now? Where am I heading? And then the third question is, how am I actually going to get there? How am I going to get there? Nehemiah, he plans his work and then he begins to work his plan. I heard that phrase a little while ago. I thought, I've got to get that into this somewhere. He plans his work and then he begins to work his plan. He wants to see the city rebuilt, completely restored, but he has to start somewhere. In verse 17, it says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble that we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins and the gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us start. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem." So you have to, like Nehemiah, we have to start where you are. That's kind of the first sub-point in this section. We start where we are. Nehemiah, he knows that all the work that has to be done. But he has to start the work right where he is. It's like there is just so much to get fixed. The vision was for the whole city to be rebuilt, re-established, the temple functioning again, God dwelling among his people again. But he says, before we get into all that other building, before we get into all of that other stuff, we need to start right here with what is right in front of us. We start with the wall. outworking the vision is very much about simply doing the next thing, taking the next step. And I don't know what that is for you, but your next step, it could be attending a marriage course or something. You know, I really want to grow in our marriage. I want to get back to that place where it used to be. I want to see us kind of pulling together more, working together better. And so you get plugged into a marriage course. Or for you, your next step, it could be attending a counselling program. Yeah, that's the next step. That's the right next step ahead of me right now in this process. For you, it could be going back to school. It could be taking an evening course on something, getting trained in a particular skill which is going to benefit a ministry and go on to benefit other people and so on. Maybe for you, your next step is to serve in the church. And you know what? That's great from my perspective, because if you remember last week, I was saying that later on in the year, we're going to be regathering again, getting all of our Sunday services all fired up again. And we are looking forward to that. We're totally looking forward to that. Imagine actually being able to minister to one another in the flesh, so to speak. That would be novel, wouldn't it? But anyway, as I said last week, it really is going to be an all-in situation. It's going to be an all hands on deck kind of effort. So you know what? We want to make it really easy for you to take that next step to serve. So over the coming weeks, what we're actually going to do is capture all the functions, the roles, the serving opportunities that will re-emerge when we start to regather again, all the activities that we're going to get sort of fired up again. And we're going to actually publish those things so that you can read through them, see what's involved and what it is that you're actually committing to. Now, for some people, though, when it comes to serving, they don't want to serve because it means they're actually going to be committing to or signing up to something for the next 6 months of their life. It's like, that's a big deal. I'm going to sign up for the next 6 months. I'm committed to this. Well, I just want to say that you don't have to do that. We're going to actually launch Serve One or Serve Once or whatever we call it, which it's going to open up the opportunity or the chance for you to serve just simply one time. That's it. No more. No further commitment, not 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever. Just serve 1 week. Just serve once. And in doing that, you're going to have the experience again of being part of community, what it is to be part of team and making things actually, this thing called church, actually happen again. So we're going to outwork our vision, our plan. We need to start right where we are. We need to take the very next step that's ahead of us. And also, this is the last point. We need to do it alongside others. We absolutely need to do this alongside others. In verse 18, he said, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us rebuild. So they began this good work. Nehemiah, he didn't do the work alone. We're going to see a lot more. He expands a lot more on this in the next chapter. But what he did, he found his community, he found his people, and they served together. They built together. And this is such a clear reminder to all of us that we need each other. We need the church. We need community. I don't think there's any greater truth and reality that we've learnt over this year of isolating from one another. That truth that we need one another. We need community. I need you. You need me. We need the church. We need to find our people again, and we need to work together and to outwork our vision together. Okay, why don't we finish by praying together? Let's bow our heads and pray.